Hello, this is Great Man from Great Man Show. We got a special guest on my show today. He has wrestled for Jim Crockett Promotions in the NWA, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. He has wrestled for Vince McMahon in the WWE, WWF times. He has done all Japan Pro Wrestling and IWA. And my guest is David Isley. Welcome to the show, David.
Hey, Greg, thanks for having me on, man. It's been a while, and
yeah,
I hope your show's been going well.
Oh, yes, I've done over 400-something plus shows, and you're my first wrestler I had on my show.
Well, there's always a first time for everything, and
yeah.
as they say, and so I'm happy to do it for you today.
Yeah. What made you want to get into wrestling?
You know, Greg, that's a good question. It goes back a lot of years. I remember being in junior high school, back in the day, and this was back, probably in the, I'm having to go back quite a few years now, but I'm thinking around the mid '70s, somewhere along that line. I remember a guy brought an old wrestling magazine to school one day. It was one of the old magazines that Bill Apter used to have out, called The Wrestler or Inside Wrestling, the ones that you could find at your grocery stores or your magazine stores. Yeah. And I remember one of the guys brought one to school one day, and I was looking through it. I was kind of, at the time, I was into comic books and things of that sort, so I kind of started collecting and some of the magazines, and then initially got started watching it on television back in the 70s. I lived in Hendersonville, North Carolina at the time, so I would catch the local show from Raleigh that would be broadcasted out of WLOS, and it's just something I got really hooked on. Wrestling was much more different back then than it is now, so I got hooked on it, and eventually then after that, I started attending some of the local live events that they had at the Asheville Civic Center, and they would have the events at 3 p.m. On Sunday afternoons, and I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, they would come to Asheville maybe once a month, over to the Civic Center in downtown Asheville, and I literally got hooked on it. It was something that I watched on television as a child and as a kid. Every Saturday, I was, just really taken by the superstars at the time. Like your Wahoo McDaniels, your Paul Joneses, your Johnny Valentines, Ole and Gene Anderson, Nelson Royal, and then there was another organization called the IWA, which had not as a big a promotion as Jim Crockett at the time where I worked. But, you had your Bulldog Browers, you had your Mighty Igors, you had your Johnny Powers and your Tex McKenzies and those types of guys. So the love of the business, really, I just got hooked on it back at that particular time. So that's really initially what got me started watching wrestling, and and then it just kind of just took off. There was a point in time that I kind of got out of it. And not followed it quite as much, I would say, probably when I went, when I was in college. Yeah. But then in 1984, I took a part-time job during college. I took a part-time job over at Ricky Steamboat's Mid-Atlantic Gym in Charlotte.
I remember him having that.
and from that point, all of the wrestlers were coming into his gym to work out. Ricky had a deal with all the wrestlers, and he didn't care what wrestler you were. Ricky is such a giving person that he allowed any wrestler to come in and work out free of charge at his gym. So he instructed the staff there to let all the wrestlers come in and work out, and that they were never charged. And so as I initially started working there at the gym, I became very close friends with a lot of the guys that were stars at the time back on television. I got extremely close with a guy by the name of Denny Brown, who used to be the NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion.
Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah. Denny and I became really, really very close friends. And then there was another guy that I became pretty close with. a guy by the name of, at the time, I cannot remember what his wrestling name was here in the Carolinas, but you would probably remember him up in the WWF as Barry Horowitz.
Oh, yeah. He was Barry Horowitz, I think. Is that the same guy that did Crusher Khrushchev, maybe?
No, that's Barry Darso.
Okay, I get him confused.
Yeah, now that I think about it, Barry Horowitz, which is his real name, he may have gone by the name of Bret Hart down here, if I remember correctly. So that being said, I started traveling to some of the shows with Denny from time to time, and he and I traveled a little bit. He was very close with Hector Guerrero, and who also did Lasertron at one time.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So we traveled around together, and I got very much involved in it at the time. So that's really initially how I got back into wrestling, and then probably in 1986, I became very close friends. I lived over in Concord, North Carolina at the time, but I became very close friends with my future Thunderfoot tag team partner, Gene Ligon.
Yeah, you were Thunderfoot number one, what I read.
That's correct, yeah. So Gene told me at the time, he said, David, there's going to be a wrestling school. Jim Crockett needs some guys to come in and fill up some of the card, I knew what my role was going to be at the time.
Yeah.
My role and responsibilities were actually just to go in there and make the top guys look good. So, that being said, there's a lot of different names that people will give the underneath talent. Whether it's whether it's enhancement talent or some guys even call them job guys and things of that sort. I had to go in there and pay my dues at the time, and I had long drives that I had to make. But that being said, I was in wrestling camp with Nelson Royal in 1986, and there were about 8 of us that went through his camp at that time. Guys that you may remember would be John Laurenitis, who is now Vice President of Talent Relations for WWE.
Yeah.
Who was also the brother of Road Warrior Animal.
Yeah.
He went through camp with us. The Barbarian's brother, John Savage, went through with us.
Wow.
Colt Steele, Larry Stevens, Ricky Nelson. Another big name that came through our camp that also went on to do other things outside of wrestling into Ultimate Fighting was Ken Shamrock. And so, that's what I did. I went in there and paid my dues, and I made a lot of trips up and down the road every week. Occasionally, we were able to fly on some shows. Then, when after we started kind of building our name up a little bit, we got a call from the offices up at the WWF at the time.
Yeah.
They needed some guys to come in and kind of do some of the same things for their talent that we were doing for Jim Crockett. And of course, at the time, that really upset Jim Crockett at the time that we went up there and because there was such a rivalry and between the two companies. But at the end of the day, we were independent contractors, and we could work for who we wanted to work for. So I would have to say that I got my feet wet with Jim Crockett back in '86. Started in '86, and in '88 we did some shows for the WWF, and they treated us extremely well. I mean, they really. It was really nice at that particular point of our careers. We were just kind of getting started and kind of getting our feet wet. As soon as we walked in the door at that particular time, their production was not really as big as it is today. It was still big, so to speak, but not like it is today. Vince came right up to us and knew our names and shook our hands and thanked us for being there and, really took good care of us. So, I've got some very fond memories of both companies. But, it was just a part of my life that I had to go through and kind of pay my dues, if I was going to stay in the business long term.
Yeah.
But that being said, after I kind of paid my dues, I kind of got on the independent circuit, for a while, and I did some things on the independent circuit locally there in the Charlotte Concord area. which kept me busy for a while. I ended up doing some shows for the another version of the IWA where, we went to Australia for a month, and that's kind of where I came in and took over the Thunderfoot, part of the Thunderfoot tag team, and became Thunderfoot #1 with Gene Ligon.
Yeah.
So at that particular point in my time here in the States, I was doing things with, different organizations. Gene and I would go in and do a tag team as the Thunderfoots, mainly up and down the East Coast at that particular point in time. But I remember being on the beach in early 1992. I was sitting on the beach in Bermuda. We were in Bermuda for a week wrestling on a tour down there, and I was sitting on the beach with the Junkyard Dog at the time.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. So JYD and I were actually sitting on the beach, and he and I had done some tag teaming that week in Bermuda together, and he didn't know a lot about me or my work and what I could do. And he said, you really impressed me out there today. He said, I'm really surprised, you haven't gone into, gone into another full-time role, maybe with WWF or WCW at the time, or whoever it was.
Yeah.
And he said, have you ever thought about going to Japan? And I said, Dog, when you go to Japan, when you get invited to come to Japan, really in the wrestling industry, you can pretty much say you've done it all, because at that particular point in time, Japan was one of the top areas in the country to work. The money was good. They took great care of you over there. But the problem was it was hard to get a position in over there because of that particular fact. The money was better there than it was here in the States. So JYD told me, he said, here's what you do. He said, put together a packet, of some of your better matches, put some pictures together, and send them to Stan Hansen over in Texas. So I sent Stan that package like JYD asked me to do. And I said, Dog, they're not going to know me because I don't really have a reputation. He said, well, Stan needs some guys to go in and out of Japan. They can't keep using the same guys all the time. They need some new faces. So I got it. I sent my package like he asked me to do. So a couple of months went by. I never heard a thing. But then about the third or fourth month went by, and Stan called me. And he said, can you be ready to leave for Japan in a couple of weeks? And I said, absolutely. And he explained to me how things were going to work, how much I would get paid, this, that, and the other. And he said, he said, you may go over there, you may never win a match. He said, are you okay with that? I said, Stan, I just want to go over there and get my feet wet and show them what I can do. I'll cross that bridge when I get there. And he said, good attitude. And so that's kind of what led my touring into Japan, with Stan, and that was back I started going into Japan in 1992, kind of going back and forth, from time to time. And, so Stan and I, just created a really, really strong relationship. We lost touch for maybe, 7 or 8 years. I got I finally found, I've been trying to track him down because sometimes phone numbers can be hard to get. So I finally found his number. So it must have been around 2000 that he and I reconnected again after several years. And that was about the time I think he may have retired. And so he and I have maintained a very close relationship ever since. We talk at least, once every other week, but we're constantly still texting, weekly, checking on each other. Stan is in his early 70s now. He's had some injuries and some pain like every other wrestler athlete goes through. He's had his fair share of, hip replacements and shoulder replacements and things of that sort, knee replacements. So, you just don't, especially in Japan where it was much more physical than it was here in the States. You just don't go into it knowing, thinking that you may or may not have an accident. Something, because at some point you're gonna have an accident and get hurt. So I mean that's just the life we chose. There's no complaining about it. But it's something I would do all over again. I would never change it. It opened up a lot of doors for me and things of that sort. But that's initially how I got my start and kind of got through it. And I've wrestled against every major name in the business.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah, I have.
I've seen the videos.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate, Greg. People, and I'm sure you remember as well. You're in the age range that would remember. But I tell these young guys all the time, if you were never ever able to experience a live event, like a Great American Bash or a Starrcade, or something that Jim Crockett promoted back in the 80s, and you could see how powerful that the Four Horsemen were at the time, and how strong of a name that the Rock and Roll Express had at the time.
The Rock and Roll Express.
If you never had an opportunity to experience these guys when they were at the peak of their careers, you just can't fully understand, how it really was. It was different back then because we were not paid on contracts. We were paid on how many people attended the event. Yeah. So you depended on, your Four Horsemen. You depended upon your Ronnie Garvins and your Rock and Roll Expresses and these types of guys to draw the crowd. Ivan and Nikita Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev that you mentioned a few minutes ago. Yeah. We depended on these guys to draw the crowd because, when you're on when you're like we were fortunate enough to be on some of those events during the summer times when we always made good money. And, if we were on the bottom match at that time, back in the late 80s, you get a young 20-something-year-old guy like myself, we could go in there in the opening match, and we could go in there and make $300 or $400. Yeah. For 15 minutes worth of work. It was physical, but we weren't killing each other. So you do that night in and night out, and plus you had your television tapings where we were paid somewhat better than some of the others. And then of course you had your Atlanta TVs on Saturday mornings down at the Superstation on WTBS.
Yeah.
So typically what would happen is, the guys back then, they were wrestling 7 and 8 times a week. They would record television on Saturday morning for the TBS show that came on at 6:05. But right after that was filmed like at 9 o'clock in the morning. So a lot of the guys were still asleep at that time, and from being out partying the night before.
Yeah.
They would either have to jump in a car and or get on an airplane and go to another event somewhere that evening. So that's it was a lot of work, and that's what a lot of people don't really understand is, when you're seeing the final product on television, people don't really have a clue what really goes on behind the scenes to make that happen.
That's a lot.
It's just a huge event and production, beforehand to get the final product of what you see on television.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Greg, I guess probably the only I had an opportunity to wrestle against every major name that came in the area here in the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic area. Like your Ric Flairs, like your Stings,
yeah.
Like your Bam Bam Bigelows, these types of guys, the Four Horsemen, the Flairs, which was also a big deal for me was, when I was a kid, watching Wahoo McDaniel and Paul Jones and the Anderson brothers,
yeah.
and then eventually being able to get in the ring with these guys and have a match. I mean, that was just, just a highlight for me.
Yeah.
I'll never forget one night when I was doing the Thunderfoot deal. I was in a singles match that night, and it was somewhere with Paul Jones. And I was a huge fan of Paul Jones growing up. And as a kid coming up, Paul's famous move that he submission hold that he used was called the Indian Deathlock. So he came to me before the match and he said, "Hey, he said, what do you want me to beat you with tonight?" And I said, "I want to submit to the Indian Deathlock." That was a big deal to me, being able for him to actually put the Indian Deathlock on me in the middle of the ring and have me submit to that. So that was just a huge event for me. And I was fortunate enough to also, matter of fact, my last match that I ever had was in 2005, and Dusty Rhodes, who was the booker at the time when I was working for Crockett.
Wow.
He was on the show that night. I think he had maybe had a match against Terry Funk, and they were going to have some run-ins that night where some of the heels would come in and do a run-in on Dusty's match. Well, I knew that was going to be my last match that night. There were some other things that I wanted to do, but I had never had an opportunity to take Dusty's bionic elbow that he so famously made famous. So I had it worked out that night. I said, I went up to him before the match and I said, "Dusty, some guys are coming in to do a run in your match. I want to make sure, that you give me one of the elbows because this is going to be one of my last matches that I may ever have." And I never had an opportunity to get in the ring with him, but I at least wanted to be able to say that I got to take the elbow from him. So we did, and I made it look like $1 million, like everybody else did. And, that was another highlight of my career. Even here in my living room, I don't have a ton of memorabilia that I have of myself, but I've got a few items here and there, and I can look across the room and I can see when I was in Australia working for a month, I had the absolute best match of my career ever with Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff while I was there. And, so I can look across my room and see a picture of Paul and I together. It's memories like that I have, the friendships that I've made, throughout my career that mean more to me than anything. I don't really miss the wrestling so much, like everybody else, as you know, I've had my fair share of, aches and pains and injuries.
All the friendship you made along the way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, last weekend, going up to Knoxville, Tennessee, this is where Ricky Steamboat has retired now. He's up in the Knoxville area. So, I had an opportunity. I was actually visiting some friends, not Ricky at the time, but I was visiting some other friends, and I plugged in his address, and I said, "You know what? I think he's home this weekend. I don't think he's traveling. Let me see how far I am from his house." And I was only 6 miles from his house. So I said, "You know what? I'm going to go pull in his driveway." I said, "If I know Ricky like I've known Ricky since 1984, one or two things. He's either working in his garage on one of his cars, or he's out in his yard, because he has an immaculate yard. He takes such good care of his property." And so as soon as I pulled in, he did not recognize my car. And I got out of the car and took my sunglasses off, and I said, "Hey, you got a few minutes for an old friend?" And oh my God, he was just so happy to see me, and we hugged for a couple of minutes, and so these are the type of relationships that you develop over the years, and that's just something that you can't put a price on is the friendships. Again, I don't really miss the wrestling business. I don't really watch it too much anymore. I may from time to time watch, Ring of Honor or something of that sort. I may watch a little of AEW from time to time. But
AEW has gone to extreme stuff now. I've never seen women wrestlers bleed until that last one they did.
Yeah, I mean, look, like anything, the product's got to change. You got to evolve into other things. I'm certainly not knocking the wrestling business and what it's become today, because they're still doing a great thing and entertaining people. And that, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is entertaining people.
Yeah.
It's just a different entertainment than the way I was brought up. And certainly if the guys can make money and they can make a living at something they're very passionate about, I support that 100%. It's just not something that I'm as interested in now than I was, back growing up, and seeing your Dr. Death Steve Williamses and the fabulous Freebirds.
Oh, yes.
And it's such a the wrestling business. It's very common knowledge. It's a hard business. It's not anything that's easy. Life on the road and life away from your family can be extremely stressful and can be very emotional at times. On my wall over here, I've got a magazine with my picture on it from Japan. And I can look around at all the guys on the program, and I can count about half of them that have already passed away for one reason or another. And they were not all drug related. Some of them were natural causes, this, that, and the other. But that's what happens. A lot of the guys just can't cope, with life after wrestling. But with me, I chose at the time, I had to have something to fall back on because I knew I couldn't wrestle forever because the injuries were going to catch up with me.
Yeah.
And so I went back to college, and I finished my degrees and things of that sort. So, I was very fortunate, very blessed, because I had an opportunity to go back to school and finish that up and do something else outside of wrestling. But I can honestly say this, and I'll tell anybody that would ever listen to me, that the best thing I ever did was go back to school and finish my education. But I can tell you this. I've never been as passionate about something than I was professional wrestling. I couldn't wait to get to work every day. If I had a day off, I was just itching to get back on the road again and go wrestle again because it's just something I loved. And really that's what brought me to Greenville when I had spent my entire life in Charlotte, North Carolina, living there. My parents were retired up in Hendersonville, and I had a brother down here, and my son was in Myrtle Beach. But I got a phone call one day from a guy that I was in wrestling camp with that actually lived here. He left Charlotte and moved to here. Was a guy named Tommy Angel, and so Tommy and I are still extremely close. He lives here in the upstate in the Greer area. And so he asked me to come down and visit, and I did that, and I came down, and I actually fell in love with Greenville. So I went back to Charlotte, and I think I actually came back to Greenville maybe a month later to kind of see if my feelings were still the same about Greenville. I really had no family back in Charlotte anymore. I mean, I had some cousins, but I was not real close with them. But I came back to Greenville and fell in love with it. And I said, you know what? That's where I need to be. That's where I need to start the next chapter of my life. So that's kind of how I got to Greenville, and I've loved every minute of it. It's been extremely exciting, for me to live here in the upstate and and attend some of the local events, sporting events here in the area. But, professional wrestling, man, it's just, it was just a huge love of my life. And, I look back on it with extreme fond memories. I have nothing bad to say about it. Would I have liked to have had maybe done some different things, or, there's always going to be some certain venues or some certain coliseums that I regret not being able to wrestle in. I would have loved to be, have been able to wrestle in, the Sportatorium out in Dallas. That's a very famous building that I would have liked to have been able to wrestle in. And, I probably would have liked to have wrestled in Madison Square Garden, one of those types of venues, or maybe the LA Forum or Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens. But overall, I had an opportunity to wrestle in Japan, in Tokyo, at the Egg Dome over there, which, at that particular time, there was 40 or 50,000 people at the event. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a lot of people, and that was back in the 90s. So, that being said, I've had an opportunity to have some really, really fond memories and look back with fond memories on my career, and I've still got a handful of guys that I still keep in touch with on a very regular basis. I still keep in touch with Teddy Long. You know, from
I got to meet him one time working at when I worked at Ballard Center before they changed the name. I worked backstage at WWE Raw.
Yep. Still, Teddy was a referee for the NWA when I was there at the time.
Yeah.
So, Teddy and I are still very close. I still keep in touch, as I mentioned, with Steamboat, Stan Hansen. I kept in touch. He passed away several years ago, but I was still very close with Kamal.
Yeah.
And James Harris, he and I were extremely close. And Road Warrior Animal just recently passed away, which I'm still extremely close with his brothers. He has two brothers that I'm. One lives in Atlanta, who I still see speak with on a regular basis. So, just the friendships we make. Going down. You spend more time with these people than you do your own families at times.
Yeah, because you're on the road with them all the time.
I think that's what people don't fully understand is, the sacrifice that the guys make. I was actually up in Charlotte, I don't know, maybe a couple of months ago, and, I happened to, just drive up to Charlotte one night and have dinner at a friend of mine's Japanese restaurant up there, and I got a phone call, and the guy who's a friend of mine who does a lot of promoting, a guy by the name of Tony Hunter, and so Tony asked me, he said, where are you at tonight? And I said, I'm sitting over here in Pineville, which is a little suburb of Charlotte, having dinner. He said, are you by yourself? And I said, I am. He said, well, I'm about 5 minutes away from you. He said, Arn Anderson and I are standing over here getting ready to do a virtual signing. So he said, why don't you come by and stop and see us before you go back to Greenville? I said, I'll do that. So, these are the type of friendships that you make, and, you have very positive experiences with all these guys. Now, don't misunderstand me. There's always guys that you're not going to get along with.
Yeah.
I was never you can't take nothing away from his work ethic, but at the time, I really wasn't a big fan of Tully Blanchard. Tully at the time, and this is nothing new. Tully had he was a different individual back then. He was a little hard to be around.
Yeah, he kind of changed his attitude once he got out of it.
kind of done a big turn for himself for the better, and but he was not a breath of fresh air to be around at times. But in any business, there's going to be guys that you enjoy working with more so than others. That's just the name of the game. And I knew that when I got in the ring with guys like the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette, when I got in the ring with the Rock and Roll Expresses and your Lex Lugers and your Stings.
Did you wrestle Lex Luger?
Oh, many times.
I don't remember. I ain't seen that video anywhere. That's why I was wondering.
Yeah, I wrestled Lex many times.
He's in very bad health.
Here at Greenville, down at the Comic Con.
Yeah, and, that's where I seen.
I went down to see. Tony Hunter was putting on that event down there with the wrestlers. So I wanted to see Jake Roberts more than anything because I used to work for Jake's father, who was Grizzly Smith, and so I wanted to go down and see Jake for a few minutes and spend some time with him, and so we got a chance to hang out during lunch together and go upstairs, and and I had never had an opportunity to meet Jerry Lawler, so he was another very well known named guy.
What's that name you was going?
Yeah, right. So I wanted to go by and introduce myself to Jerry and say hello to him, and see those guys for a few minutes. So I have some very, very fond memories of the business, but I'm very fortunate to have come through a time in my career and a time in the wrestling business that that most people can never comprehend. Thank goodness we still have YouTube where you can go back and watch these old events and things of that sort. Thank goodness we have that. And then there's of course I don't have it, but I understand that you can see a lot of a lot of my old matches on the WWE network. So there's another avenue where as long as the network and YouTube are around, our matches will play on forever. And and it's real funny because we still, even guys that like myself who came up and we paid our dues early, we still get a lot of emails, a lot of requests, to sign old pictures and things of that sort. And it blows my mind, what people collect and things of that sort. But I'm always happy if somebody has something of mine that, an old picture or an old magazine that I was in. I've got no problem signing that.
Or trading cards. And
yeah, absolutely. It's just I've got such good memories, and and I appreciate all the fans when they would come to the events. It was just I was always so happy to be in the ring, and it was a hard life. Don't get me wrong. It was we had to stay in shape. We had to eat right. We had to train right. And the two men who trained me, early on in my career, Nelson Royal and Gene Anderson. I have such high remarks for both of those guys, and I was so blessed to be able to be a pallbearer in Nelson's funeral when he passed away. That was just such a big honor for me to be able to be asked to be able to do that, because Nelson and I had a real special friendship, had a special relationship, and I was just extremely proud to be able to do something like that.
Yeah. Did you go by somebody named Viper too?
No. Viper.
It was under that listing of like Thunderfoot 1 and then Viper 2 underneath the picture I found.
Not that I can remember, Greg. I only had the only guy that I remember Viper was Brad Anderson, who was Gene Anderson's son. He did some tagging or some matches on WCW back in the day as Viper, I think. Or he might have been, no, it might not have been Viper, it might have been Zan Panzer or something.
Somebody must have mistagged it, I guess, with that underneath.
Yeah, but I don't, the only other time that I remember ever putting a mask on, I did go up to do a couple of shows for Jim Cornette when he started Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And he did not want me to wrestle as myself because I had already had so much TV exposure with Crockett. He did not want me to, he needed some other names. So I remember he put a mask on me and called the Mighty Yankee. And, I remember I only worked for Jimmy a couple of times on television up there. I think Bob Caudle was doing some of the ring announcing.
Bob Caudle, I love his voice.
Bob, it's funny, kind of a real funny story is, my mom and my dad were extremely close with a family, and I was as well with a family in Charlotte. They've all passed away now, but Bob's wife was kin to these people through marriage, and when I was growing up, they filmed the old studio matches at WRAL TV up in Raleigh.
Wow.
So that was the highlight of my summer, was when my mother would get tickets to take me to Raleigh.
Oh, cool.
To sit for a television taping that night, and that was just a big deal to me. So, I think anybody that starts out in wrestling these days really ought to be a fan of the business and to learn it, just like any other sport. These guys have paved the way for them to be able to do what they do nowadays. I recently went by where my parents, I had wanted to go by their grave sites, but there were two guys that were known as the Mcguire Twins from up here in Hendersonville. They were the largest tag team twin brothers in history.
Wow.
And they were probably 600 pounds apiece, and they were twins. And they had a very big name back in the day. They were very big over in Japan, but I wanted to go by and see their tombstones in Hendersonville, and their tombstones are absolutely gorgeous, and I mean, they're big. I mean, they were some really big tombstones.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, these guys were 600 pounds each, and they wrestled and they rode their little mini bikes down to the ring, and so these are the type of things that I'm very appreciative of, is the guys who paved the way for me to be able to do what I did for a living for gosh, man, 10 plus years. So, I had a great career. I'm very thankful that I was able to get into business when I did, and I'm thankful to have gotten out when I did as well, because I had an opportunity to wrestle against your more named guys, especially here in the Carolinas, and I don't want to take anything away from guys also like your Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch's, guys like him, who I really enjoy wrestling against, and guys like your other people that forget about are your Mighty Wilburs and the other characters like that, so to speak. So anyway, I'm just extremely happy with the way my career went and the way it ended. I've got nothing but fond memories. And as you probably know, Austin Idol, he lives right here in Greenville.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I heard seen you talk about him and stuff.
Yeah, I don't see him a whole lot, but I used to see him occasionally down at some of the Downtown Alive events or Main Street Friday events, and would get a chance to catch up with him for a few minutes. But Greenville's a great city to live in. I mean, as you know, you live here yourself, so it's just a great city to live in.
I'm originally from the Lyman, Spartanburg area, but I like this area better.
Yeah, I do as well. I've gone into into Spartanburg recently or some time back, but I still enjoy Greenville. But it's been Greg, it's just been it's been an honor, to get to spend a little time with you and talk about some of the old days. I don't talk about the old days too much anymore, but I'm just extremely blessed to have been able to follow a dream. And I would tell anybody, if you don't think that the dreams can still be attainable, I'm living proof that it is possible. So if anybody has a dream or wants to go into professional wrestling, don't let anybody tell you, because believe me when I tell you, I had more people tell me I would never do it and I could never make a living at it. Yeah. And I proved them all wrong. I made a good living for many years, and had a chance to see some of the major cities around the world and get paid to do it. So I'm very blessed, and I'm thankful to I appreciate you asking me to come on, and talk about some things. It's been such a
you're welcome.
Such a great
Maybe
time.
Maybe me and you would get together one day and get to see some of your memorabilia, what you got, your mask and all that stuff.
Oh yeah. I've got like I said, I don't. I recently called my son, and I said, son, look, my son's not into, he doesn't follow wrestling. He's 24. He doesn't follow wrestling. And, I said, do you even want my memorabilia? Do you want this stuff? Do you want my outfits and my mask and things? He said, yes, Dad, I want that stuff. So, I can't keep everything, but if he certainly wants it, I'll certainly save it for him, which I have. It's just it was the 80s in wrestling, the 70s and 80s, in my book, were some of the best times that there ever were. But at any rate, Greg, I appreciate the time we've had an opportunity to spend together today.
Me
it's
too.
gone by extremely fast.
Yeah, it was fun.
45 minutes just went by real fast.
Yeah.
God, there's so many things I probably have forgotten about. We get dropped on our heads quite a bit, so the memory, it's not always as good as it once was. But it's been fun being able to reminisce and talk about some old things. So I appreciate the time today.
You're welcome, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, man, and I hope it gets out to a few listeners, and hope they'll listen to it with and just be as passionate about it as I've been.
I'll tag you in it whenever I share it over. I'll share it on your page.
Absolutely, buddy. Well, thanks so much, and I appreciate it, Greg. We'll wrap it up, and I appreciate you having me on today.
No, you're welcome. You have a good day.
Okay, thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.
Talk to you soon, pal.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, that's a great man for a show. We had David Isley, and we'll be back later tomorrow for Thursday's show. That's a great man for a show. Peace. I'm out.